The digital clock on the dashboard read 10:47 p.m. when Trevor Walsh pulled his battered Ford pickup into the service entrance of Hamilton Tower. 15 stories of glass and steel rising into the November sky, each window a rectangle of amber light, where people who earned in a day what he made in a month were still working, still climbing, still chasing something he had stopped dreaming about 7 years ago, when Sarah died and left him with a daughter and debt that multiplied like a virus. He killed the engine and sat for a moment in the darkness, letting the silence settle around him. The radio had been broken for 3 months. He could not afford to fix it and had discovered that silence was cheaper than distraction. Through the windshield, the city sprawled in every direction, a grid of lights and shadows that never truly slept. Somewhere out there, Ruby was brushing her teeth at Harris's place, probably negotiating for 5 more minutes before bed, probably winning because Harris had never learned to say no to a 7-year-old girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn streak. The phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, screen cracked in the upper left corner from when he had dropped it while fixing a furnace 2 weeks ago. Ruby's face filled the display, a selfie she had taken last summer at the park ice cream, melting down her chin, gap-toothed smile wider than the sky. The message was 3 words in an emoji. "Good night, Daddy, love you." Trevor typed back with thumbs that still smelled like pipe sealant despite washing them twice. "Love you more, sweetheart. Be good for Mr. Harris." He added a heart emoji, sent it, and watched the message turn from sending to delivered to read. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Ruby was composing something, probably another question about whether they could get pancakes tomorrow, or if she could finally have a kitten, despite their apartment lease explicitly forbidding pets. The dots vanished. No new message came. She had probably been called to bed by Harris, probably tucked under the spare room blanket that smelled like cedar and old coffee. Trevor pocketed the phone and climbed out of the truck boots, hitting concrete, with a sound that echoed off the underground parking structure walls. His toolbox sat in the truck bed, red metal scratched, indented from a decade of work. He had bought it with his first real paycheck after graduating trade school, back when he thought plumbing was temporary, just something to pay bills while he figured out what he really wanted to do with his life. 23 years old and convinced he had time to become something else. 37 now, and realizing that plumber was not what he did, but who he was, that the temporary had calcified into permanent when he was not paying attention. The service elevator smelled like industrial cleaner and something vaguely metallic. Trevor pressed the button for the 15th floor and watched the door slide shut, his reflection appearing in the brushed steel surface. Tired eyes, 2 days of stubble because razor blades were expensive, and he had been rationing them, work shirt with Hamilton Tower maintenance embroidered on the chest, even though he was not technically an employee, just a contractor they called, when the regular crew was overwhelmed, or when something broke after hours and needed immediate attention. The elevator hummed upward, floor numbers lighting up in sequence. 345. He had been inside this building maybe 30 times over the past 2 years, always at night, always through the service entrance, always invisible to the people who actually worked here. They existed in parallel universes that occasionally intersected when a pipe burst or a toilet overflowed, or the heating system failed and suddenly the invisible man became briefly grudgingly acknowledged before fading back into the walls where he belonged. 10th floor, 11th, 12th. The elevator slowed and Trevor shifted his toolbox to his other hand. The dispatch call had been vague. Burst pipe 15th floor, executive level, water damage spreading. Come immediately. The property manager had sounded, stressed voice tight with the particular anxiety of someone who knew that water in expensive carpet meant insurance claims and angry tenants, and questions about why preventive maintenance had not caught the problem before it became a crisis. The doors opened onto a corridor that smelled like new paint and something floral, probably from the air freshening system that kicked on automatically after business hours to keep everything smelling like success and money. The carpet here was thick, the kind that absorbs sound and cost more per square foot than Trevor paid in monthly rent. Recessed lighting cast everything in soft amber. No harsh fluorescence like the floors below, where administrative assistants and junior associates worked in cubicles that could have been anywhere in any city, in any building where dreams went to get processed into spreadsheets. He found the problem near the northwest corner. A ceiling panel had partially collapsed, water dripping in a steady stream onto plastic sheeting that someone had laid down in a half-hearted attempt at containment. The carpet squelched under his boots as he approached water, spreading in a dark stain that would take industrial drying equipment and probably full replacement to fix. Behind the walls, he could hear the hiss of water under pressure, finding any crack or gap to exploit. Trevor set down his toolbox and pulled out his flashlight, shining it into the ceiling cavity where pipes ran like arteries through the building's skeleton. There, a joint had failed, probably corroded from the inside over years, finally giving way under routine pressure. Not a dramatic break, just metal fatigue and time doing what they always did to things that were supposed to last forever but never quite managed it. The shutoff valve was accessible through a panel in the wall. He retrieved his wrench, found the valve, and cranked it closed. The hissing stopped, immediately replaced by the drip, drip, drip of residual water working its way down through the ceiling tiles. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the building was holding its breath. He checked his watch. 11:17 p.m. The repair would take maybe 45 minutes if he worked efficiently, maybe an hour if he ran into complications. He had pipe sections in the truck, fittings, sealant, everything he needed. Get it done, get paid, get home by 1 in the morning, sleep for 5 hours, wake up and do it all again. Because this was what life looked like when you had a kid depending on you and no other options except keep moving forward or drown. Trevor was measuring the damaged section when he heard it. A sound that made every muscle in his body lock up, made the wrench freeze in his hand, made time slow down into individual frames like a film reel, clicking forward one image at a time. A scream, female, raw, terrified. The kind of sound that bypassed rational thought and triggered something older, something wired into the lizard brain that recognized fear and pain across any language or context. It came from down the corridor, maybe 50 feet away, cutting through the expensive silence like a blade. Then nothing. Dead silence. As if the scream had been a hallucination, something Trevor's exhausted mind had conjured from the white noise of building systems and late-night isolation. He stood frozen, wrench still in hand, heartbeat suddenly loud in his ears. The corridor stretched before him in both directions, empty and still. Amber light thick carpet closed office doors. The executive level at 11:20 on a Tuesday night. Nobody should be up here. The building cleared out by 7, even the workaholics who put in 12-hour days. The only people who stayed later were cleaning crews and maintenance workers, and occasionally some junior associate trying to impress a partner by pulling an all-nighter on a brief that would be shredded and rewritten anyway. Trevor took a step toward where the scream had originated. His boots left wet prints on the carpet. The logical part of his brain was cataloging reasons to walk away. Not your problem. You're here to fix a pipe. Get involved and you create complications. Ruby needs you to stay out of trouble, to stay employed, to stay invisible. But the scream kept echoing in his head, bouncing around his skull like a ricocheting bullet. That had not been surprise or annoyance or even anger. That had been terror, the sound of someone who had just realized they were in serious danger and had run out of options. He moved forward. The corridor curved slightly, following the building's exterior wall. Office doors lined both sides, nameplates in brushed steel identifying occupants. Jennifer Martinez, VP Operations. David Chen, Senior Legal Counsel. Marcus Thompson, Chief Financial Officer. People who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, whose signatures moved millions of dollars, who probably never thought about the man fixing their pipes or cleaning their toilets or keeping the building systems running so they could focus on whatever important work they were doing. The executive restroom door was closed. Trevor stopped outside it, hand hovering near the handle. This was the moment. Walk away and stay invisible, stay safe, stay employed. Open the door and step into something that was none of his business, something that could shatter the fragile stability he had spent 7 years building for Ruby. His phone buzzed in his pocket again. He pulled it out. Another message from Ruby, sent despite probably being told to go to sleep. A photo this time. Her in Harris's spare bed blanket, pulled up to her chin, stuffed bare, tucked under her arm, making an exaggerated sleepy face for the camera. The message below read, "Me going to sleep like you said. Actually sleeping, not just pretending." Trevor stared at the photo. 7 years old and already figuring out how to work the angles, how to make him smile, even when exhaustion was pulling him under. Sarah would have loved this, would have laughed at their daughter's negotiating tactics, would have known exactly what to say to make Ruby feel secure without spoiling her. But Sarah was gone, and Trevor was standing outside a bathroom door on the 15th floor of a building where he did not belong, where someone had screamed and then gone silent, and he had a choice to make that would define what kind of father he was, what kind of man he had become in the 7 years since he became Ruby's only parent. What would Ruby think if she knew he had heard someone in trouble and walked away? Trevor opened the door. The scene inside arranged itself in his vision like a photograph developing in chemical solution details emerging in layers. Marble countertop, polished chrome fixtures, mirror running the length of one wall, reflecting everything twice. Two men in suits that probably cost more than Trevor's monthly income. A woman with her back against the counter, one arm twisted behind her at an angle that made Trevor wince. Her other hand braced against the marble, trying to create distance that the man holding her would not allow. Vanessa Crawford. He recognized her from the lobby directory, from the business magazines that sometimes appeared in waiting rooms, from the kind of coverage that happened when someone climbed high enough to be worth writing about. CEO of Crawford Technologies, self-made entrepreneur, the kind of success story that made people believe in bootstraps and determination and all the myths that let society pretend the system was fair. Right now, she looked like someone being assaulted in a bathroom at 11:20 p.m. by two men who clearly had not expected anyone to interrupt them. The man holding Vanessa's arm was young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from never being told no, never facing consequences, never having to consider that actions might have costs. His other hand gripped a stack of papers, and he was talking to Vanessa in a low, urgent voice that Trevor could not quite make out. The second man stood slightly back, holding what looked like a pen, his face pale and nervous, eyes darting between Vanessa and his companion, like he was starting to realize this had escalated beyond whatever they had planned. Time stretched. Trevor stood in the doorway, wrenched still in his hand, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to reconcile the reality before him with the comfortable narrative that rich people in expensive buildings lived in a different world where this kind of thing did not happen. The young man holding Vanessa noticed Trevor first. His head snapped up, eyes cold and calculating, assessing the interruption the way someone might assess an unexpected variable in an equation. Wrong floor, buddy. His voice carried the casual arrogance of someone used to being obeyed. Move along. Trevor did not move. His fingers tightened on the wrench knuckles, going white. Vanessa's eyes met his, and he saw everything he needed to see in that moment. Fear, yes, but also something else. Recognition that this might be her only chance, that whatever was happening here had reached a critical point where one more witness could tip everything into a different outcome. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder fabric, pulled away to expose her collarbone, and the beginning of a bruise that was already starting to darken. Her wrist, where the man held it, showed red marks that would turn purple by morning if someone did not stop this right now. I said, move along. The young man's voice gained an edge, impatience creeping in. Whatever you think you saw, you didn't see it. Go fix your toilet or your pipe or whatever they pay you to do. Let her go. Trevor's voice came out rougher than he intended. 7 years of cigarettes he had quit when Ruby was born still living in his throat. Let her go right now. The young man laughed. Actual laughter, like Trevor had told a joke, like the absurdity of a plumber giving him orders, was the funniest thing that had happened all night. Do you know who you're talking to? The question hung in the air, rhetorical and pointed. My father owns 40% of this company. Frank Morrison. Maybe you've heard of him. He owns the building you're standing in, owns the truck you drove here in, owns your entire miserable life. If he decides he wants to make a point, the words landed like physical blows. Frank Morrison. Even Trevor knew that name. Real estate developer, venture capitalist. The kind of money that moved through channels most people never saw and shaped the city in ways that were invisible until suddenly a neighborhood was different, or a building appeared where empty lot had been, or zoning changed and nobody could quite explain how. One complaint from me. The young man's grip on Vanessa's arm tightened and she winced, trying to twist away. One phone call and you're done, not just fired, blacklisted. Every property manager in this city will know your name and know not to hire you. Think about that before you decide to play hero. Trevor thought about Ruby, thought about rent due in 9 days, thought about the dental work she needed that kept getting postponed because the estimate had come back at $400 and he did not have $400, not all at once, not without missing other payments that would cascade into late fees and service disconnections and the slow-motion disaster that happened when poverty got its claws into you. Thought about what he would tell his daughter when she asked why they had to move again, why school was changing again, why everything was always so hard. Thought about the way Sarah used to look at him before cancer ate her alive from the inside back, when she still believed he would figure it out, would somehow provide the stability she needed to feel safe. But mostly he thought about Vanessa's eyes, about the way they were pleading without words, about how she had clearly been trapped here by these men doing something that Trevor did not fully understand, but recognized as fundamentally wrong. I'm going to say this one more time. Trevor stepped into the bathroom, positioning himself between the men and the door. Let her go. Brett Morrison released Vanessa with a shove that sent her stumbling against the counter. She caught herself rubbing her wrist, breathing hard. Brett moved toward Trevor with the fluid confidence of someone who had never been in a real fight, who thought intimidation was the same as strength. You've made a huge mistake. Brett's face was inches from Trevor's, now close enough that Trevor could smell expensive cologne and whiskey. Do you know what we were doing here? Conducting business? Company business. And you just interrupted a private meeting between executives. He raised his voice, projecting toward the second man who still stood frozen near the back wall. Scott, tell him this was just business. The second man, Scott, nodded jerkily. Just business. Nothing illegal. Just a private conversation about company matters. Brett turned back to Trevor, smile spreading across his face like oil on water. You broke into a private meeting with a weapon. He gestured at the wrench in Trevor's hand. That's assault. That's threatening behavior. That's everything we need to make sure you never work in this city again. Trevor felt the trap closing around him. The wrench that was just a tool 30 seconds ago had become a weapon in Brett's narrative. The intervention that had seemed obviously necessary was being reframed as aggression, as violence, as exactly the kind of behavior that would justify destroying Trevor's life. I heard someone scream. The words felt inadequate, flimsy against the weight of Brett's confidence in money and connections. I came to help. You came to threaten us. Brett pulled out his phone thumb, moving across the screen. I'm calling security. We have an intruder who attacked us in a bathroom. Armed and dangerous. He looked at Trevor while he spoke, making sure every word landed. Should be here in about 2 minutes. And then we'll see how your hero complex works out for you. Vanessa had not said anything. She stood against the counter, still rubbing her wrist, eyes moving between Trevor and Brett, like she was calculating odds, weighing options, trying to decide which path led to the least damage. Tell them. Trevor looked at her, trying to communicate something he could not put into words. Tell them what happened here, what they were doing to you. But Vanessa stayed silent, and Trevor watched something die in her expression, some last hope that she could navigate this without consequences. The bathroom door burst open. 2 security guards, older man in front with gray hair and tired eyes, younger one behind him with hand on his radio. The older guard took in the scene with the practiced efficiency of someone who had responded to 1,000 late-night calls and learned to read situations fast. Building security. The older guard's voice was neutral, professional. We got a call about an intruder with a weapon. He looked at Trevor, at the wrench, at Brett and Scott, and Vanessa arranged like pieces on a board. Thank God you're here. Brett's face transformed fear, replacing arrogance so smoothly it had to be practiced. This man came in while we were in a private meeting. Started threatening us with that wrench. We were terrified. He pointed at Trevor like someone identifying a criminal in a lineup. Frank. The older guard's nameplate read Frank Henderson, and his eyes held something Trevor recognized. Understanding, maybe, or at least skepticism. That true Trevor looked at Vanessa again. She was the only one who could untangle this, the only one whose testimony mattered. But her eyes slid away from his, fixed on something past his shoulder somewhere safe, where she did not have to make a choice. I heard someone in trouble. Trevor kept his voice level, trying to sound reasonable despite the adrenaline making his hands shake. I came to investigate. Found these 2 men restraining Ms. Crawford, trying to force her to sign something. Lies. Brett stepped closer to Frank. Complete fabrication. We were having a business discussion with Ms. Crawford when this man burst in with that weapon. Started making wild accusations, threatened to hurt us if we didn't leave. The younger guard moved to Trevor's side hand still near his radio. "Sir, I need you to put down the wrench." Trevor set it down slowly on the counter, the metal clanging against marble, loud in the tense silence. Without it, he felt naked, exposed, just a man in work clothes facing people who could destroy him with a phone call. Frank looked at Vanessa. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here?" The seconds stretched. Trevor watched Vanessa's throat work, watched her gather herself for whatever she was about to say. This was the moment. Truth or comfortable lies? Reality or convenient fiction? There was a misunderstanding. Her voice came out, careful, measured, each word chosen like she was diffusing a bomb. Mr. Walsh heard something and came to investigate. Things got confused. She rubbed her wrist again, a nervous gesture that contradicted her calm words. "I don't think anyone meant harm. Not the truth, but not quite a lie either. The kind of statement that lawyers and executives learn to craft words that said everything and nothing that could be interpreted a dozen different ways, depending on what someone wanted to hear." Frank studied her for a long moment. The torn blouse, the marks on her wrists, the way she held herself like someone trying to appear smaller than she was. Then he looked at Brett and Scott, at their expensive suits and entitled expressions, at the papers clutched in Brett's hand. "So nobody's hurt. Nobody wants to file a report." "I want him arrested." Brett's voice rose, control slipping. "I want formal charges filed. Assault, trespassing, threatening behavior. Everything." For what exactly? Frank's tone stayed neutral, but Trevor heard the edge underneath. "Ms. Crawford says it was a misunderstanding. You say he threatened you, but the only one with visible injuries is her." The question hung there, obvious and damning. Brett's jaw tightened. Scott looked like he might be sick-faced, going from pale to gray. A formal statement meant police reports, meant questions about what Brett Morrison and Scott Hendress were doing in a women's restroom at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, meant testimony under oath about who had bruises and torn clothing and red marks on their wrists, meant scrutiny that clearly neither of them wanted. "Just get him out of here." Brett's voice dropped, but the venom remained. "He's fired, terminated, blacklisted. I'll make sure every property manager knows his name by morning." He looked at Trevor with an expression that promised consequences. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." Frank gestured toward the door. "Mr. Walsh, let's go." Trevor retrieved his wrench movements, slow and careful, trying not to give them any excuse to escalate. He looked at Vanessa one last time, trying to understand why she had protected them, why she had chosen silence over truth. But she would not meet his eyes. The corridor felt different now. The amber light seemed harsher, the thick carpet somehow ominous, like he was walking through a space that had revealed its true nature. Frank walked slightly ahead, the younger guard behind Trevor, an escort that was not quite arrest, but carried the same weight. They waited for the elevator in silence. Trevor's mind raced through implications, through cascading consequences. Blacklisted. Every property manager will know your name. Jobs drying up, rent unpaid. Ruby asking questions he did not know how to answer. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. They stepped inside and Frank pressed the button for the ground floor. As the door slid shut, he spoke quietly. "That was stupid what you did up there." Trevor said nothing. What could he say? That he had heard someone scream and could not walk away. That he had a daughter who still believed her father could fix anything, who needed to believe the world made sense and good people did good things. Also brave. Frank's voice softened slightly. But bravery doesn't pay rent, doesn't keep you employed. You stepped into something way above your pay grade, and now you're going to pay for it. What was I supposed to do? The question came out raw, frustrated. She was being hurt. They were forcing her to sign something. Probably. Frank shrugged. But she didn't say that, did she? She protected them, which means whatever they have on her is worse than what you saw. And that means this goes deeper than you can fix with a wrench and good intentions. The elevator descended through the building floor numbers, counting backward. 1098. Trevor leaned against the wall, exhaustion crashing over him in waves. The pipe on 15 was still broken. Water probably still spreading through the ceiling cavity, but that was not his problem anymore. He had Ruby's goodnight message on his phone, her gap-toothed smile, an exaggerated sleepy face, the innocence of a 7-year-old who still thought her father had everything under control. And he had maybe 8 days before rent came due, and whatever work he had lined up evaporated because Brett Morrison made phone calls to people who mattered. 7 years of keeping his head down, of staying invisible, of doing the work and going home and building a life that was small but stable. Gone in the time it took to open a door and try to do the right thing. The elevator reached the ground floor. Frank walked him to the service entrance where his truck waited in the parking structure. The younger guard stayed by the elevator radio, crackling with communication about the situation on 15. Listen, Frank stopped before they reached the door. I've worked security for 23 years. Seen a lot of situations like what happened up there. Rich kids doing stupid things because they never learned consequences. Executives trapped by their own success. People like you trying to be heroes and getting crushed for it. He pulled out a business card, handed it to Trevor. If you need a witness statement about what you saw about the condition Miss Crawford was in, call me. Can't promise it'll matter, but at least there'll be something on record. Trevor took the card, studied Frank's name and phone number printed in neat block letters. Why would you do that? Because sometimes the right thing is still worth doing, even when it costs. Frank's tired eyes held something like sympathy. But fair warning, Brett Morrison has his father's resources and none of his restraint. He's going to come after you hard. Make sure you've got your finances in order and a backup plan ready. The November air hit Trevor like cold water when he stepped outside. The parking structure was nearly empty, his truck sitting alone under flickering fluorescent light that needed replacing. He climbed into the driver's seat, set his toolbox in the passenger footwell, and sat in the darkness trying to process everything that had just exploded in his life. His phone showed 12:17 a.m. Ruby would be asleep by now, curled under Harris's spare blanket, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dreamed about. School plays and playground adventures, and maybe the kitten she kept asking for despite Trevor explaining that pets were expensive and their lease did not allow them anyway. Trevor started the truck, the engine turning over after 3 tries, dashboard lights flickering before stabilizing. The drive back to Harris's place took 20 minutes through empty streets, traffic lights cycling through their patterns for an audience of nobody. His own apartment was dark when he drove past it. 2-bedroom in a building that had seen better days, rent just barely affordable if everything else went right. He owed $900 in 8 days and had maybe $300 in his checking account after paying the utility bill that had been threatening disconnection. Harris's house sat in a neighborhood that was gentrifying, meaning half the homes had been renovated and cost 6 times what Harris had paid 30 years ago, and the other half were like his. Old, worn, but solid. Foundations that would outlast the cosmetic upgrades happening around them. The porch light was on, moths circling in dizzy orbits. Harris opened the door before Trevor could knock, reading glasses perched on his nosebook in hand. Ruby went down about an hour ago. Fought it hard, but exhaustion won. Harris stepped aside to let Trevor in. She ate all her dinner, did her homework, asked about 70 questions I couldn't answer. The house smelled like coffee and old wood, familiar and safe. Trevor followed Harris into the kitchen, where 2 beers sat on the table, condensation beating on the bottles. Something happened tonight. It was not a question. Trevor sat down heavily, accepted the beer Harris slid across to him. Could tell by your face when you drove up. Harris settled into his own chair, joint creaking. Want to talk about it or just drink? For a long moment, Trevor said nothing. Then the whole story came spilling out. The scream, the bathroom, Brett Morrison and his threats, Vanessa's silence, the security guards, and the certainty that his life was about to collapse. Harris listened without interrupting, the way he always did, patient and steady and completely present. When Trevor finished, the old man took a long pull from his beer and set it down carefully on the table. So you tried to help someone, and now they're going to destroy you for it. Pretty much. And the woman you helped won't back you up because these guys have something on her. Trevor nodded. That's harsh. Harris's voice held no judgment, just acknowledgement of reality. But also, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. Also, you did the right thing. In that moment, with what you knew, you made the call that protected someone being hurt. That matters. It won't matter when I can't pay rent. When Ruby's asking why we have to move again, maybe not. But it'll matter when she asks what kind of man her father is, when she wants to know if doing right is worth the bust. Trevor thought about Ruby's message about her performative sleepiness and the way she tried to make him smile even from a distance. About Sarah in the hospital, lucid for maybe the last time, making him promise to take care of their daughter, to show her by example what kind of person to be. I don't know if I can survive this. The admission felt like failure. Brett Morrison has resources I can't fight. He's going to make sure I never work again. Harris stood, moved to the counter, came back with 2 more beers, even though neither of them had finished the first. He was a combat engineer in Vietnam, was blown up twice, came home missing 3 fingers and half his hearing. Built a good life anyway, because quitting wasn't in his vocabulary. You remember when Sarah got sick? How you worked 3 jobs to pay medical bills while still being there every day, Trevor remembered. Remembered exhaustion so complete, he would sometimes forget where he was, would wake up and not know if it was morning or night. Remembered Ruby at 6 months old strapped to his chest while he did electrical work because childcare was not in the budget. You survived that. Sarah didn't, but you did, and you kept Ruby safe and fed and loved through the worst thing that could happen to a family. Harris's voice was firm. You can survive this too. The beer tasted bitter, or maybe that was just Trevor's mood staining everything. Through the doorway, he could see into Harris's spare bedroom where Ruby slept, her wild curls spread across the pillow, stuffed bear clutched tight. I need to check on her. Go ahead, I'll be here. Trevor moved quietly through the house floorboards, creaking despite his care. The spare bedroom door was half open, nightlight casting soft blue glow across Ruby's sleeping face. She looked peaceful, mouth slightly open, one hand flung out from under the blanket. 7 years old and already carrying more weight than any child should have, to moving through life with her father as the only constant, while everything else shifted and changed and refused to stay stable. He knelt beside the bed, careful not to wake her, and just watched her breathe. In and out, steady and unconscious, the fundamental rhythm that meant life continuing, that meant tomorrow would come, whether he was ready or not. Ruby. He whispered the name, testing it in the darkness. His daughter, his responsibility, his reason for everything he did or failed to do. She stirred slightly, but did not wake, caught in whatever dream had captured her. I'm sorry. The words were barely audible. Sorry that doing the right thing means things are about to get hard. Sorry that your dad couldn't just walk away and stay safe. But he was not sorry, not really. Because walking away would have meant betraying something fundamental about who he wanted to be, who he needed to be, for Ruby to respect when she was old enough to understand complexity. He stood knees protesting and pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders, pressed a kiss to her forehead, so light she did not stir. Then he left her to sleep and returned to the kitchen where Harris waited. She okay? Perfect. Just perfect. They finished their beers in comfortable silence. The clock on the wall ticked past 1 in the morning, then 1:30. Harris did not suggest Trevor go home, and Trevor did not offer. They both knew he would be staying, would be taking what comfort he could from proximity to his daughter before the storm hit. Around 2 a.m. Harris stood and stretched, joints popping. I'm going to bed. Couch is yours if you want it. Clean sheets in the closet. Thanks. For everything. For always. That's what friends do. Harris paused in the doorway. Tomorrow's going to be rough. Week after that, probably worse. But you're not alone in this. Remember that. Then he was gone. Footsteps heavy up the stairs, door closing with a soft click. Trevor sat in the kitchen surrounded by darkness and the amber glow from the streetlight outside, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a moment he considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Mr. Walsh, this is Vanessa Crawford. We need to talk. Trevor stared at the text, trying to make sense of it. The woman who had stayed silent while Brett destroyed his life was now reaching out. Why? What could she possibly say that would change anything? He typed back, your friend Brett made it clear how this ends. I don't see what there is to talk about. The response came immediately. He's not my friend. What you saw tonight, it's complicated. But I'll make this right, I promise. When I do, I'll need you to tell the truth about what you saw. The truth is, I'm about to lose everything because I tried to help you. A longer pause this time. Then, not always. I'm asking you to trust me just for a little while. I'm working on something. It's going to take time, but I will fix this. Trevor wanted to believe her, wanted to think that someone with resources and power would actually help instead of just protecting themselves. But belief was expensive, and he had already spent too much tonight. He typed, how long, I don't know. Weeks, maybe. I need to be careful. They have leverage on me, serious leverage. But I'm collecting evidence, building a case. When the time comes, I'll need you to testify about what you saw. And until then, I just let my life fall apart. No response came. Trevor waited 5 minutes, then 10. Vanessa had said her piece and disconnected, leaving him with vague promises and the certainty that tomorrow would bring consequences. He stretched out on Harris's couch, too wired to sleep, but too exhausted to stay fully awake. His mind kept replaying the scene in the bathroom, trying to find some other choice he could have made, some path where he helped Vanessa, but did not sacrifice everything in the process. But there was no such path. The moment he opened that door, the moment he chose intervention over invisibility, the outcome had been set. Brett Morrison was going to use every resource at his disposal to destroy Trevor's life, and Vanessa Crawford was trapped by whatever leverage they held over her, and Trevor had maybe a week before everything he had built for Ruby crumbled. Sleep came eventually fitful and full of fragments. Sarah in the hospital asking him to be strong. Ruby at 3 years old barely understanding that mommy was gone. The screams from the bathroom overlapping with other screams, other moments of crisis that Trevor had faced and somehow survived. When morning came too early, harsh light through Harris's curtains, Trevor woke with his neck cramped and his head pounding. The clock showed 6:47 a.m. Ruby would be up soon, would need breakfast and clean clothes and the performance of normalcy that children required even when adults were falling apart. He stood, folded the blanket, and moved toward the kitchen. Coffee first, then face whatever came next. Harris was already up, eggs sizzling and a pan toast browning. The old man glanced over, took in Trevor's appearance, and nodded toward the coffee pot. Figured you could use it strong. Trevor poured a cup black because cream and sugar felt like luxuries his mood could not accommodate. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint exactly what he needed. Ruby appeared in the doorway, hair wild, pajamas rumpled, dragging her stuffed bear by one arm. She looked at Trevor, then at Harris, then back at Trevor with eyes that were too perceptive. "Are you sad, Daddy?" The question hit harder than expected. Trevor set down his coffee and knelt to her level. "Just tired, sweetheart. Long night fixing a broken pipe. Did you fix it?" The lie formed easily. "Not yet. Have to go back and finish today." "Okay," she yawned, showing the gap where her front tooth had fallen out 2 weeks ago. The tooth fairy had left $2 under her pillow money. Trevor could not afford, but paid anyway because some things mattered more than financial sense. "Can we get pancakes for breakfast?" "Mr. Harris is making eggs, but they have vegetables in them." Her nose wrinkled in theatrical disgust. "Vegetables are for dinner, not breakfast." Harris laughed, spatula waving. "Vegetables are for whenever I say they are in my kitchen, little miss." The morning ritual unfolded with familiar comfort. Ruby negotiating, Harris holding firm, Trevor sipping coffee, and trying to pretend everything was normal. They ate together at the small kitchen table, Ruby chattering about school and her friend Emma and the science project due next week that she had not started yet. Trevor's phone stayed mercifully silent through breakfast. No calls, no texts, no confirmation that Brett had made good on his threats. But it was early still. The property managers Brett would contact probably were not even at work yet. The systematic destruction of Trevor's reputation would come later, efficient and thorough. After breakfast, Trevor drove Ruby to school. She sat in the passenger seat, backpack on her lap, talking about the book she was reading, about a girl who solved mysteries with her dog. The morning traffic was light, other parents doing the same school run, everyone pretending that getting children educated was the most important thing, when really it was just the structure they all clung to, prevent chaos. The school building loomed ahead, red brick and chain-link fence playground, already filling with kids who ran and shouted and existed in the moment without worrying about rent or jobs, or fathers who had made catastrophically stupid choices in bathrooms at midnight. "Have a good day, sweetheart." Trevor leaned over to kiss her forehead. "Learned something amazing." "I always do." Ruby grinned, gap-toothed and confident, and bounced out of the truck. She made it 3 steps before running back. "Daddy, yeah, I love you bigger than the sky." It was their thing. Their call and response that Sarah had started when Ruby was barely walking. Trevor felt his throat tighten. "Love you bigger than forever, baby." She ran toward the school building, backpack, bouncing wild curls, flying everything good in Trevor's life, compressed into 60 pounds of stubbornness and joy. He watched until she disappeared through the doors, then sat in the idling truck trying to gather enough strength to face whatever came next. His phone rang. Property manager for the Riverside complex where Trevor had 3 scheduled jobs this week. The voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. Due to scheduling conflicts and budget restructuring, they were canceling all upcoming maintenance contracts, effective immediately. They would mail his final check within 10 business days. Trevor thanked them, mechanically ended the call, and watched it happen. This was how it would go. Polite language and corporate excuses, nobody mentioning Brett Morrison or threats or blacklists, just cancellations and budget cuts and unfortunate timing until Trevor's schedule was empty and his reputation was ash. The second call came 5 minutes later. Different property manager, same message. Sorry for the inconvenience. Appreciate your past work going in a different direction. By the time Trevor made it back to his apartment, there had been 4 cancellations. By noon 6, his calendar for the next 2 weeks, previously packed with jobs that would have kept him solvent, was now blank space where income used to be. He sat on his couch in the apartment that would probably not be his much longer and tried to calculate paths forward. $300 in checking, $900 due for rent in 7 days. Utility bill already overdue, disconnection notice threatening. Ruby's school fees for next month. The truck needed brake pads desperately, the grinding sound getting worse every time he pressed the pedal. Without work coming in, he had maybe 3 weeks before the collapse became complete, maybe 4 if he stretched every dollar until it screamed. His phone showed 23 missed calls, all from numbers he recognized as clients or property managers. He did not need to listen to the voicemails to know what they said. The same polite cancellations, the same manufactured excuses. Brett Morrison had worked fast, made his calls, pulled his strings, activated the network of favors and obligations that held the city's property management community together. One word from someone with Frank Morrison's backing and Trevor Walsh became untouchable. Radioactive someone to avoid because association meant risk. Trevor stood and moved to the window. Outside, the city continued its routine. People going to work, living their lives, existing in the comfortable ignorance of those who had never been crushed by systems they did not understand. He had been one of them, once believing that hard work and honesty were enough, that the world operated on principles that made sense. But the bathroom on the 15th floor of Hamilton Tower had shattered that comfortable ignorance. Showed him what power looked like when it decided you were inconvenient. Showed him how quickly a life could disintegrate when someone with resources decided to make you an example. His phone rang again. This time Harris. Heard your truck pull up an hour ago. You coming back over or hiding in your apartment? Not hiding, just thinking. Thinking's dangerous when you're stressed. Come back, we'll figure something out. There's nothing to figure out. Trevor's voice came out flat. Brett Morrison destroyed me in less than 12 hours. Every job I had lined up is gone. I can't pay rent. Can't keep Ruby fed. Can't fix the truck when it breaks down completely. This is game over. Silence on the other end. Then Harris's voice, careful and measured. You giving up. What other option is there? Fighting back. Documenting what happened. Getting a lawyer. Making enough noise that Brett can't just steamroll over you. With what money? Trevor felt hysteria bubbling up, bitter laughter that would turn into something darker if he let it. I'm a plumber who lives paycheck to paycheck. Brett Morrison's father owns half the city. This isn't a fight, it's an execution. More silence. Then, come back over. Bring your tools. I've got wiring work that needs doing. Pay's not great, but it's something. And Ruby can stay here as long as necessary. You too, the spare room's empty. I can't take charity, it's not charity, it's friendship. And you're going to need both to survive what's coming. Trevor ended the call and sat back down on the couch. The apartment around him felt temporary, suddenly like a stage set that could be struck at any moment. 7 years in this space, making it home for Ruby, trying to create stability in a world that refused to stay still. And now it was ending because he had opened a door and tried to help someone. His phone buzzed with a text, unknown number, but Trevor recognized the pattern from last night. Vanessa, I know you're dealing with cancellations. I'm working as fast as I can. Please don't give up. I will make this right. Trevor stared at the message, trying to find some reason to believe it. But belief required evidence, and all he had was promises from someone who had already protected her attackers at his expense. He typed back, easy for you to say, when you're not the one losing everything. No response came. Trevor waited 10 minutes, then gave up and pocketed the phone. If Vanessa Crawford wanted to help, she knew where to find him. Until then, he had decisions to make about how to stretch $300 until it covered rent and food and everything else that kept a life from collapsing completely. The rest of the day passed in a blur of canceled jobs and mounting dread. Trevor drove to Harris's place, helped with wiring work that paid $40 cash, barely enough to buy groceries. They worked in silence, mostly Harris respecting Trevor's need to process to exist in the physical labor that at least had clear outcomes and definable problems. Ruby came home from school quieter than usual. Trevor picked her up at 3, and she climbed into the truck without her usual chatter about what happened that day. She sat with her backpack on her lap, staring out the window, 7 years old and already learning that sometimes the world just hurt for no reason she could understand. "How was school, sweetheart?" "Fine." "Just fine," she shrugged, small shoulders barely moving. Trevor pulled into a parking lot, killed the engine, and turned to face his daughter. "Ruby, look at me." She turned and he saw it immediately. Red-rimmed eyes puffy from crying. His heart cracked watching her try to hold it together. "What happened?" "Some kids were saying things." Her voice came out, small, defeated. "About you, about how you got in trouble and lost your job." Trevor felt rage and helplessness war inside him. "Who said that?" "Emma and Tyler and some others. They said their parents told them you did something bad and we were going to be homeless." Ruby's voice cracked. "I told them it wasn't true, but they just laughed at me." This was what Brett had done. Not just destroyed Trevor's livelihood, but hurt his daughter, turned her into a target because her father had tried to do something right. "Come here." Trevor unbuckled his seatbelt and pulled Ruby across the center console into an awkward hug. She buried her face in his chest and let the tears come. 7 years of trying to be strong for her father, finally breaking under the weight of playground cruelty. "Listen to me." Trevor spoke into her hair, keeping his voice steady even as fury burned through him. "What those kids said isn't true. I didn't do anything wrong. I helped someone who needed help. Sometimes when you do that, people get angry because it's inconvenient for them. But that doesn't make it wrong. Then why is everyone acting like you're bad because the world isn't always fair?" The truth felt too heavy for her age, but Ruby deserved honesty. Sometimes people with money and power can make things hard for people who don't have those things. But that doesn't change what's right and what's wrong. It just means doing the right thing costs more sometimes. Ruby pulled back to look at him, tears still wet on her cheeks. Was it worth it? Helping that person? The question froze Trevor. He thought about lying, about telling her what she needed to hear. But Ruby had Sarah's eyes and Sarah's ability to spot dishonesty, and she deserved better than comfortable fiction. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." The admission hurt. "Ask me again when we see how it ends. But I can tell you this. I'd rather have you grow up knowing your dad tried to help someone than knowing he walked away because it was safer." Ruby considered this, working through 7-year-old logic, trying to make sense of adult complications. "Okay." Her voice was still small but steadier. "I believe you. That's all I need." They drove to Harris's house and Trevor carried Ruby's backpack inside while she ran ahead to the spare bedroom where her stuffed animals waited. Harris looked up from the newspaper he was reading, took in Trevor's expression and nodded toward the kitchen where 2 beers already sat waiting. "You're a mind reader, just experienced with catastrophe." Harris slid 1 bottle across. "How bad?" "They got to her at school. Kids saying I'm some criminal who's going to make us homeless." "Ah." Harris took a long pull from his beer. "That's low even for rich assholes trying to protect themselves." Trevor sat down, exhaustion pulling him under. "I don't know how to protect her from this. Can't fight what other parents are saying. Can't stop kids from being cruel. Can't even promise her that everything's going to be okay because I don't know if it will be. So you tell her the truth, that you're doing your best, that life is hard sometimes, that her dad would rather face consequences than teach her to look away when people need help. And when we're homeless, when I can't feed her or keep her safe, then we'll figure that out too." Harris's voice was firm. "You're not alone in this. Ruby stays here as long as necessary. You too. We'll manage the food, the bills, whatever needs managing. You focus on finding work and dealing with the legal fallout. There is no work. Brett Morrison made sure of that. Then you get creative, do cash jobs, work under the table, expand your range beyond this city if necessary." Harris leaned forward. "You survived Sarah dying. You'll survive this too. It'll hurt and it'll be ugly, but you'll come out the other side because you don't have another choice. Ruby needs you functional, not broken." Trevor wanted to believe it, wanted to think that survival was just determination multiplied by time. But sitting in Harris's kitchen, watching his life disintegrate in real-time belief felt impossible. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. For a moment, he thought it was Vanessa again, but the message was different. "This is Pat from Northwest Property Management. Heard what happened. Can't officially hire you because of pressure from above, but if you need cash, work under the table, I have some things that need fixing. Call me." Trevor stared at the message. One person willing to risk helping him. It was not much, but it was something. Proof that Brett Morrison's reach was not quite absolute, that there were still decent people who would bend rules to do right. He showed Harris the text. The old man smiled, grim but satisfied. "See, you're not completely alone." Trevor read the message again, trying to extract hope from 43 words. Then he texted back, "Thank you. We'll call tomorrow." That night, after Ruby had fallen asleep and Harris had gone to bed, Trevor sat on the porch with his third beer and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. The air was cold enough that he could see his breath, November promising the winter that would make everything harder. Vanessa Crawford had asked him to trust her to wait while she built some case that would supposedly make everything right. But trust was expensive, and Trevor was already broke. He had maybe a week before the rent came due, and he had no way to pay it. Maybe 2 weeks before the cascade of missed payments created problems that could not be fixed with good intentions and vague promises. His phone showed 11:37 p.m., almost exactly 24 hours since he had heard that scream in Hamilton Tower. One day since his life had pivoted from difficult but manageable to spiraling toward disaster. Trevor finished his beer and went inside. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of old wood settling. He stretched out on the couch that was becoming too familiar, pulled the blanket Harris had left for him up to his chin, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring more consequences, more cancellations, more problems, more evidence that doing the right thing in a world built for profit and power was a luxury he could not afford. But tonight Ruby was safe and fed. Tonight he had a roof over his head and a friend who refused to let him drown alone. It was not victory, but it was survival. And sometimes survival was all a man could manage when the world decided to crush him for being inconvenient. Sleep came eventually, thin and restless, full of dreams about bathrooms and screams and choices that could not be unmade. The first full week after Hamilton Tower passed in a rhythm of degradation that Trevor came to recognize as his new normal. Wednesday brought 2 more cancellations, both property managers using language so similar, Trevor wondered if Brett had provided a script. Thursday, the utility company made good on their disconnection threat, and Trevor came home to an apartment without power. November cold, seeping through walls that no longer had electric heat to fight it back. Friday, he gave notice to his landlord. 30 days required by the lease, but Trevor knew he would not make it 30 days. He had $217 in checking after buying groceries, and rent was due in 3 days. Pat from Northwest Property Management called that afternoon with work. A backed-up drain in a strip mall on the edge of the city, off the books, cash only. Trevor drove 40 minutes through traffic to spend 3 hours fishing hair and congealed grease out of pipes, his hands raw and chemical burned by the time he finished. Pat handed him $60 in worn 20s and looked away when she did it, shame or pity, or both, written across her face. Ruby cried herself to sleep that night, quiet sobs she thought Trevor could not hear, through Harris's spare room door. He stood in the hallway, listening, his own face wet, trying to decide if going in would comfort her or just make her feel worse about crying. In the end, he went in, sat on the edge of the bed, and said nothing. Just put his hand on her back and felt her breathing slow, felt her body relax into sleep despite the tears. The second week was worse because hope had fully died and only grinding endurance remained. Trevor took every cash job he could find, the kind of work that did not require references or reputation. Fixing a fence for a neighbor who paid $40, unclogging a toilet for $20, replacing a water heater for someone Harris knew under the table cash money that barely covered the parts. He worked from dawn until Ruby's school let out, picked her up, brought her back to Harris's, then went back out for evening jobs that paid nickels and dimes. His body ached constantly, the kind of deep muscle exhaustion that came from pushing past reasonable limits day after day. Sleep became something he grabbed in 3-hour chunks between jobs, never enough to feel rested, just enough to keep moving. The apartment sat empty now, their belongings packed into boxes stacked in Harris's garage. Trevor had taken Ruby there one last time to let her say goodbye to the space that had been home for 3 years. She walked through the rooms, touching walls, her small handprints leaving marks in the dust, 7 years old and already learning about impermanence. The landlord kept the security deposit, citing damage and unpaid utilities. Trevor did not fight it. What was the point? He had no leverage, no resources, no ability to argue with people who held all the cards. Ruby's situation at school deteriorated. She came home Tuesday of week 2 with a torn backpack zipper ripped completely off. Contents spilled across the playground. Some boy named Marcus had grabbed it during recess, called her trash girl, said her dad was a criminal who attacked people. Ruby had tried to grab it back, and the zipper gave way, shattering her books and pencils and the picture of Sarah she kept in the front pocket. Trevor bought her a new backpack at the thrift store, $8 for something with cartoon characters she had aged out of 2 years ago. She carried it without complaint, without mentioning that everyone else had brand names and hers had someone else's name written in faded marker on the inside. The truck's brake pads finally gave out completely on Thursday. Trevor was driving to a job when the grinding turned to metal on metal, screaming, the pedal going soft under his foot. He limped to a parking lot and sat with his head against the steering wheel, calculating costs he could not afford. Parts and labor would run $300 minimum. He had $68 in his pocket and no prospects for more until a weekend job Pat had lined up. Harris showed up an hour later with tools and brake pads from an auto supply store. The old man dropped under the truck without being asked, without waiting for thanks, and spent 4 hours replacing pads and bleeding lines, while Trevor worked beside him in silence. When they finished, grease-stained and exhausted, Harris refused payment for the parts. Consider it an investment in keeping you mobile. Can't work if you can't drive. Trevor tried to argue, tried to insist on paying him back, but Harris waved him off with the finality of someone who had made up his mind and would not be moved. Vanessa called twice during the second week. Trevor let both calls go to voicemail. Her messages were variations on the same theme: still working on it, need more time, please don't give up. The words felt hollow, coming from someone who probably spent more on lunch than Trevor made in a week of grinding cash jobs. But Thursday night, third week, his phone rang at 11:42 p.m. Trevor was on Harris's couch, too wired to sleep despite bone-deep exhaustion. He saw Vanessa's number and almost rejected it, but some combination of desperation and curiosity made him answer. It's been 3 weeks. His voice came out flat, no energy left for pretense. Still complicated. Vanessa's voice sounded different, thinner, stretched tight like wire under tension. More than you know, but I'm close. I have evidence now. Real evidence. Trevor said nothing. Let her fill the silence. Brett and Scott have been embezzling money for 18 months. She spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other. Nearly $800,000. They created shell companies, falsified reports, forged my signature on transfers. They built a paper trail that makes it look like I was the one doing it. The number hung in the air between them. 800,000. More money than Trevor would make in his lifetime. More money than he could properly conceptualize beyond knowing it was enough to ruin lives, to destroy companies, to justify the kind of leverage that had kept Vanessa silent. That's why you protected them that night. It was not a question. Yes, if they had released those documents before I could prove they were fake, I would have been finished. Probably in prison. Trevor thought about Brett Morrison's confidence in that bathroom, the certainty that he held all the power. Thought about 3 weeks of watching his life disintegrate while Vanessa built her case. So what now? You have evidence. Go to the police. I need a credible witness. Vanessa's voice steadied, found firmer ground. You already lost everything telling the truth. If you testify at an emergency board meeting, tell them what you saw that night. It changes the narrative. Makes this not just financial crime, but assault, blackmail, witness intimidation. Trevor closed his eyes. Harris's couch, Harris's house, Harris's charity, keeping him and Ruby off the street. 3 weeks of watching his daughter learn that the world was crueler than she had imagined. 3 weeks of grinding poverty and humiliation and the slow erosion of dignity. Brett's father owns 40% of your company. You really think he'll turn on his own son? Frank Morrison is a businessman first. When he sees evidence that his son stole from the company, falsified records, assaulted the CEO, and then destroyed a witness's life to cover it up. Vanessa paused. He'll make the choice that protects his investment. Frank built his fortune on reputation. Brett's actions threaten everything. And what do I get? That question felt mercenary small, but Trevor was past caring about nobility. 3 weeks had burned through whatever remained of his pride. The truth coming out. Your reputation restored. She hesitated. And a job. We're going to need a new facilities manager for Hamilton Tower. Someone we can trust. The pay is $60,000 a year. Full benefits. Medical, dental, retirement matching. Trevor's breath caught. $60,000. Twice what he had made in his best year. Benefits meant Ruby could see doctors without him calculating whether they could afford the copay. Meant stability, safety, everything he had been fighting for. Why would you offer me that? Because you earned it. Vanessa's voice was quiet but certain. Most people talk about integrity. You actually have it. That's rare. The silence stretched between them, Trevor trying to identify the trap, the angle he was missing. But he heard only exhaustion and sincerity in Vanessa's voice, someone else who had been ground down by 3 weeks of barely surviving. When the word came out rough. Friday morning, emergency board meeting at 10. I'll present the evidence and I need you to testify about what you witnessed. She paused. I know I'm asking a lot, but this is how we make it right. Trevor thought about Ruby crying herself to sleep, about the torn backpack and playground cruelty, about living in Harris's spare room with no end in sight, about 3 weeks of watching everything he built crumble because he had opened a door and tried to help. I'll be there. Friday, 10 a.m. Thank you. Vanessa's relief was audible. Trevor, I mean it. This is going to work. After she hung up, Trevor sat in the darkness trying to believe it. Trying to imagine walking into Hamilton Tower as something other than the invisible plumber. Trying to imagine $60,000 a year, and stability and the ability to give Ruby the life she deserved. But belief was expensive, and Trevor had learned that promises from people with power often evaporated when tested by reality. Friday morning arrived cold and gray November, threatening rain. Trevor stood in Harris's bathroom at 7:30 a.m., studying himself in the mirror. He had shaved carefully, used Harris's cologne, sparingly put on his only dress shirt and the khakis he usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences. The man staring back looked tired, older than 37, but reasonably presentable. Ruby was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with cereal, watching him with eyes that missed nothing. You look fancy. Where are you going? Important meeting. Could change things for us. Good change or bad change, Trevor? Knelt to her level, taking her small hands in his. Hopefully good, sweetheart. Really good. But I need you to be patient a little longer, okay? Just trust that your dad is working on fixing things. I trust you. Ruby's voice was matter-of-fact, absolute faith that Trevor did not feel he deserved. You always fix things. The drive to Hamilton Tower took 30 minutes through morning traffic. Trevor parked in visitor parking, this time not the service entrance, walking through the front lobby like he had a right to be there. The security guard glanced at him, checked a list, and nodded him toward the elevators. Conference room 1512. Ms. Crawford is expecting you. The elevator ride up felt different than that night 3 weeks ago. Then he had been invisible, just another contractor fixing what broke. Now he was a witness, someone whose testimony might actually matter, might shift the balance in a room full of people who made decisions that changed lives. The conference room door was closed when he arrived at 9:50 a.m. Trevor could hear voices inside, muffled by expensive wood. He waited, shifting his weight, acutely aware of how his clothes did not quite fit right, how his shoes were scuffed beyond polishing. The door opened and Vanessa emerged. She looked different than in the bathroom that night, composed, powerful, in control. But Trevor saw the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she held herself. You came. Relief and something else in her voice. Said I would. They're ready. She gestured toward the conference room. Just tell the truth. Exactly what you saw. Trevor nodded and followed her inside. The room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, massive table that could seat 20 chairs that probably cost more than Trevor's monthly income back when he had income. Board members arranged around the table, mostly older men in suits that screamed wealth and power. Frank Morrison sat at the head. Silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that had made hard decisions and slept fine afterward. Brett sat to his right, Scott Hendricks beside him, both looking significantly less confident than that night in the bathroom. Vanessa moved to the front where a laptop waited. Trevor took a seat near the door, trying to be small, trying not to draw attention until called upon. Thank you all for coming on short notice. Vanessa's voice was professional, controlled. I've called this meeting to address a serious matter that threatens not just my position, but the integrity and financial stability of this company. She opened the laptop and a spreadsheet appeared on the screen behind her. Numbers accounts transfers. For the past 18 months, approximately $793,000 have been systematically transferred out of company accounts into offshore holdings. Trevor watched the room react. Frank Morrison leaned forward, an expression unreadable. Other board members exchanged glances. The kind of looks that meant calculations happening behind professional masks. Vanessa walked them through it methodically. Bank records from the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, transaction logs showing transfers originated from Brett's office and Scott's IT department, forensic accounting that traced every dollar from company accounts through shell companies and back to personal holdings. Brett's face went from confident to pale to gray. Scott looked like he might vomit. Then Vanessa clicked to security footage. The hallway outside the executive restroom timestamped 11:27 p.m. 3 weeks ago. The angle did not show directly into the bathroom, but the partially reflective door surface caught enough. 2 men, 1 woman, clear struggle. That's not. Brett started, but Frank cut him off with a gesture. There's a witness. Vanessa looked at Trevor. Mr. Trevor Walsh, an independent contractor who was working on a plumbing emergency that night. He heard me scream and intervened. All eyes turned to Trevor. He stood feeling every set of eyes assess him, judge him, try to determine if his testimony mattered. Tell them what you saw. Vanessa's voice was quiet, steady. Trevor took a breath and spoke. The words came easier than expected, just truth laid out in sequence. The scream, the bathroom, Brett holding Vanessa with her arm twisted, Scott with papers trying to force her signature. The threats after Trevor intervened. The 3 weeks of systematic destruction that followed. When he finished, silence filled the room. Heavy, suffocating silence. Frank Morrison spoke finally, voice carefully neutral. And you're willing to testify to this under oath? Yes, sir. I already lost everything. Truth is all I have left. Frank turned to Brett. His face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that preceded explosions. Tell me she's lying. Tell me you didn't do this. Brett's mouth opened, closed. Scott had his head in his hands. The truth was written in every line of their body language, every second of silence that stretched too long. I want them arrested. Vanessa's voice was firm. I want full restitution, and I want Mr. Walsh's name cleared publicly with understanding that anyone who continues to blacklist him will face legal action from this company. Frank stood slowly. He looked older suddenly, the weight of his son's betrayal visible in the slump of his shoulders. Security. Send someone up. We have a situation requiring police involvement. Dad? Brett's composure finally cracked. Dad, I can explain. We were going to pay it back. It was just temporary. You forged documents. Frank's voice was dead flat. Embezzled nearly $1 million. Assaulted your CEO. Then destroyed an innocent man's life to cover it up. There's no explaining that. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Trevor watched Brett and Scott let out in handcuffs, Brett still trying to argue, while his father stood silent and broken at the window. Vanessa found Trevor by the elevators after it was over. She looked exhausted but relieved. Thank you. I know that was hard. It was necessary. She handed him a business card. The job offer stands. Facilities manager, $60,000. Benefits start immediately if you want it. Trevor looked at the card, heavy stock paper with embossed lettering. The kind of thing that belonged in a different world. I want it. But I need to make something clear. If I see something wrong happening, I'm going to speak up. Even if it costs me. That's who I am. Vanessa smiled. That's exactly why I'm offering it to you. The handshake was firm, professional. Trevor rode the elevator down, feeling like he was in a dream, like reality had not quite caught up to what just happened. He texted Harris from the truck. Tell Ruby her dad's not a bad guy, after all. And we can turn the electricity back on. The response came immediately. About damn time, get home. We're celebrating. Trevor started the engine and pulled out of Hamilton Towers parking lot. 3 weeks of hell, 3 weeks of watching everything crumble, and now suddenly the possibility of rebuilding. Not just surviving, but actually building something stable. He drove toward Harris's house through mid-morning traffic, phone buzzing with messages. Pat from Northwest congratulating him. The landlord from his old building apologizing for keeping the deposit. One by one, people who had distanced themselves were reaching back out, testing whether association was safe again. Trevor ignored most of them. Let them wonder. Let them wait. Ruby was at school, Harris at work. Trevor let himself into the empty house and sat at the kitchen table in silence. $60,000 a year. Benefits. The ability to give Ruby stability, safety, the childhood she deserved instead of the one she had been getting. He pulled out his phone and texted Ruby, even though she could not check it until school let out. Dad's got good news. Really good. Can't wait to tell you. Then Trevor put his head in his hands and let himself feel it. The relief, the exhaustion, the fragile hope that maybe doing the right thing had actually mattered. That 3 weeks of suffering would lead to something better instead of just more suffering. The tears came unexpected and unstoppable. 7 years of holding everything together, of being strong for Ruby, of never letting her see him break. 3 weeks of grinding poverty and humiliation. And now this, the possibility of redemption. Feeling like something he did not deserve, but desperately needed. When Harris came home at lunch to check on him, Trevor was still sitting at the table, face wet, phone in hand. You okay? The old man's voice was careful. Yeah. Trevor looked up, smile breaking through tears. Yeah, I think maybe we're going to be okay. 3 months felt like 3 years when measured in the distance traveled from rock bottom. Trevor stood in the lobby of Hamilton Tower on a Monday morning in February, coffee in hand, wearing clothes that actually fit because he could afford to buy them new instead of hoping the thrift store had his size. The lobby security guard nodded at him by name, now not as someone who needed checking, but as someone who belonged. The elevator ride to his office on the 8th floor had become routine, the kind of comfortable repetition that meant life had settled into patterns that did not require constant crisis management. His office was small, nothing like the executive suites on 15, but it had a door with his name on it and a window that overlooked the city and a desk where he could actually do the work of managing building systems instead of just fixing them when they broke. Trevor Walsh, Director of Facilities Management. The nameplate still looked surreal, sometimes like someone else's life he was temporarily inhabiting. But the paycheck that hit his account every 2 weeks was real enough. $60,000 divided by 26 pay periods, minus taxes and insurance, leaving him with more money than he had ever seen on a regular basis. The apartment he and Ruby had moved into was real. 2 bedrooms in a building with actual maintenance staff and a landlord who fixed things when they broke instead of ignoring calls. Ruby's bedroom had a door that closed and walls she could paint any color she wanted, and space for the desk where she did homework instead of working at kitchen tables in borrowed houses. The health insurance was real, proven 2 weeks ago when Ruby fell at school and needed stitches. Trevor had walked into the emergency room without calculating whether he could afford the visit, had given them his insurance card, and watched them process it without his stomach clenching in anticipation of bills that would take months to pay. The stitches cost him $30 copay. $30 that he paid without missing it, without having to choose between medical care and groceries. His phone buzzed with a text from Harris Coffee. Later. Got something to show you. Trevor typed back, 2 p.m. Work perfect. See you then. The morning passed in meetings about HVAC maintenance schedules and elevator inspections, the kind of administrative work that would have bored him senseless 6 months ago, but now felt like luxury. Problems that could be solved with budgets and planning instead of desperate improvisation and cash jobs that barely covered expenses. His team consisted of 4 maintenance workers who had been wary of him at first, this outsider, who had been elevated past people with more seniority and better connections. But Trevor had learned early that respect came from showing up in work clothes when systems failed at midnight, from knowing how to actually fix things instead of just managing people who fixed them. 3 months in, they had stopped testing him and started treating him like someone who belonged. Lunch was a sandwich at his desk while reviewing proposals for the summer cooling system overhaul. Numbers that made sense, budgets that were adequate, the ability to plan months ahead instead of living paycheck to paycheck. Trevor signed off on the proposal and sent it up the chain to Vanessa's office, their interaction now professional and distant, the bathroom incident 3 months past becoming history they acknowledged but did not dwell on. At 2, Trevor drove to the coffee shop where Harris waited in a back booth. The old man had a folder in front of him and an expression that meant something significant was about to be shared. You look respectable, Harris gestured at Trevor's work clothes. Almost didn't recognize you without grease under your fingernails. Give me a burst pipe at midnight and the grease comes right back. Trevor slid into the booth across from him. What's in the folder, Harry pushed it across the table. Arrived this morning, thought you'd want to see it. Inside were newspaper clippings, court documents, official-looking papers with state seals. Trevor scanned them, the story emerging in legal language and journalistic summary. Brett Morrison and Scott Hendress sentenced to 3 years each in federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Frank Morrison stepping down from Allboard's reputation, permanently damaged by his son's crimes. Crawford Technologies recovering slowly, stock price stabilizing after initial scandal. 3 years felt light for what they had done, but Trevor understood how justice worked for people with money and lawyers. They would serve maybe 18 months in minimum security facilities that were closer to college dorms than actual prisons, would emerge with connections intact and trust funds waiting and the kind of second chances that people like Trevor never got. But they would emerge with records, with Google results that would follow them forever, with the knowledge that their actions had consequences even if those consequences were not proportional to the damage they caused. There's more. Harris flipped to another page. Scholarship program. Crawford Technologies partnering with local schools. Ruby qualifies. Trevor read the description. Full tuition for families affected by the company's recent restructuring priority given to children of employees' merit-based awards for academic achievement. Ruby's name was on a preliminary list pending Trevor's approval. She doesn't need this. We're stable now. Let it go to kids who actually need it. Trevor. Harris's voice was patient but firm. Let Ruby have this. She earned it too. She survived those 3 weeks same as you. Let her benefit from how it ended. The truth in that settled uncomfortably. Ruby had paid prices Trevor could never fully repair. The torn backpack and playground cruelty and nights crying herself to sleep. If some scholarship could ease that burden, could give her opportunities she would not have otherwise, his pride was not worth refusing it. Okay, I'll sign the paperwork. Good. Harris closed the folder. Now tell me how you're actually doing, not the work stuff, the real stuff. Trevor considered the question, trying to find honesty beneath the relief of financial stability. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for someone to realize they made a mistake hiring me, for Brett to have some other card to play that destroys everything again. That's normal. You spent 7 years in survival mode. 3 months isn't enough to rewire your brain for stability. Ruby's doing better. The words came easier than expected. Kids at school stopped giving her trouble after the news articles came out. Parents apologized. She got invited to birthday parties, made the school play. Trevor smiled despite himself. She's playing a tree in the spring musical. Very excited about her costume. Sarah would have loved that. Yeah. The grief was still there 7 years later, but dulled by time and circumstances into something manageable. Sarah would have loved seeing Ruby thrive, would have been proud that Trevor had made the hard choice even when it cost everything. His phone buzzed. Text from Ruby, even though she knew she was not supposed to use her phone during school hours. Dad, can Emma come over after school? Please, 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 Trevor typed back. Ask your teacher if it's okay to text during class. Then yes, Emma can come over. 3 dots appeared immediately. Teacher said it's fine. We're at lunch. Thank you, you're the best. The casual normalcy of it hit harder than expected. Ruby asking friends over because they had space and stability and the kind of life where spontaneous playdates were possible. Not calculating whether they could afford snacks or whether Trevor would be home or whether the apartment was presentable enough for other parents to see. You're doing good. Harris's voice cut through Trevor's thoughts. Better than good. You took a bad situation and turned it into something functional. Ruby's thriving. You're building a career instead of just surviving job to job. That matters. Doesn't feel like enough sometimes. It never does. That's the curse of actually caring. Harris finished his coffee. But you're further along than you think. 3 months ago, you were sleeping on my couch wondering how you'd feed your daughter. Now you're worried about whether you're doing well enough in a salaried job with benefits. That's progress, even if it doesn't feel dramatic. Trevor drove back to Hamilton Tower for afternoon meetings, Harris's words settling into something like acceptance. Progress was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was just the absence of crisis, the ability to breathe without calculating disaster, the slow accumulation of normal days that built into stable weeks, that built into functional months. Evening came, and Trevor left work at 5:30, an actual end to the workday, instead of scrambling for the next cash job. He picked up Ruby from school where she burst out the doors with Emma in tow, both girls talking over each other about the spring musical and their tree costumes and how they needed green paint for art class tomorrow. The drive home included a stop at the art supply store where Trevor bought paint without checking his account balance first. $8 for supply Ruby needed paid with a debit card that would not overdraft, received with a smile from his daughter that was worth more than the number suggested. Emma's mother picked her up at 7, making small talk with Trevor about school events and weekend plans, treating him like a normal parent instead of someone to be wary of. The shift in social perception was subtle but significant. He was no longer the plumber who had gotten in trouble, but Ruby's dad, who worked at Crawford Technologies, who had been mentioned in news articles about corporate fraud, who had done something brave, even if the details were vague to people outside the immediate story. After Emma left, Ruby helped Trevor make dinner. Pasta with vegetables. She only complained about moderately garlic bread that filled the apartment with smells that meant home and safety, and the kind of ordinary domesticity that Trevor had fought for without knowing if he would ever achieve it. They ate together at their own table in their own apartment, Ruby chattering about school, while Trevor listened and made appropriate responses. After dinner, Ruby did homework at her new desk, while Trevor reviewed work emails on his laptop, both of them existing in the same space without crowding each other, without the claustrophobia of shared rooms in borrowed houses. Bedtime came at 9. Ruby brushed her teeth and changed into pajamas and climbed into her own bed with her stuffed bear and the reading light Trevor had installed last week. He sat on the edge of her bed, the nightly ritual they had maintained through every apartment and crisis and temporary living situation since Sarah died. Dad Ruby's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Remember when things were really bad? When we lived at Mr. Harris's, I remember. Are they going to get bad again? The question pierced through Trevor's chest. 7 years old and already understanding that stability could be temporary, that good things ended without warning. The knowledge that security was never guaranteed. I can't promise nothing will ever be hard again. Trevor chose honesty over comfort. Life has problems that come up, but we're in a much better place now. I have a good job that pays enough for us to be safe. We have savings building up. If something goes wrong, we have resources to handle it instead of just hoping for the best. Ruby considered this working through logic beyond her years. Because you helped that lady. Because I tried to do the right thing and it worked out. Eventually, after being really hard for a while. Was it worth it? The same question she had asked 3 months ago now, with enough distance to want a real answer. Trevor thought about the 3 weeks of hell, the cancellations and disconnections and grinding poverty, Ruby crying herself to sleep and coming home with torn backpacks, the humiliation of relying on Harris's charity, and the constant fear that everything would collapse completely. But he also thought about what he would have become if he had walked away, about the lesson Ruby would have learned watching her father choose safety over someone being hurt, about the man he wanted to be versus the man he would have been if he had closed that bathroom door and returned to his pipe. Yes, the word came out certain. It was worth it. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because walking away would have meant teaching you that doing right only matters when it's convenient. And that's not the kind of person I want to be. Not the kind of person I want you to be. Ruby smiled, gap-toothed and sleepy. I'm glad you helped her. Even though it was hard. Me too, sweetheart. Trevor kissed her forehead. Me too. He turned off her light and pulled the door mostly closed, leaving it open a crack the way she liked. In the living room, Trevor poured himself a beer and stood at the window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, people were making choices, opening doors or walking away, helping or staying safe, building the kind of world they wanted to live in through a million small decisions that accumulated into something larger. Trevor's phone showed a message from Vanessa. Brief and professional, board approved your proposal for summer maintenance. Budget is approved. Well done. He typed back, thank you, appreciate the opportunity. The exchange was cordial, distant, nothing like the desperation of 3 months ago. They had moved past the trauma into something functional. Not friendship exactly, but mutual respect built on shared crisis survived. The weeks that followed settled into comfortable patterns. Work became routine, in the best way, challenges that were solvable with resources and planning. Ruby thrived at school, her confidence rebuilding after the damage from those 3 weeks. The spring musical happened, and Trevor sat in the audience, watching his daughter stand perfectly still on stage as a tree, her costume painted green and brown, her face serious with concentration. Harris came to the performance too, sitting beside Trevor with a smile that suggested he understood the significance. Not just a school play, but evidence that Ruby had recovered, that the damage was healing, that life was returning to something resembling normal. After the show, Ruby ran to them with flowers someone had given her, face flushed with excitement. "Did you see me? I didn't move at all. I was the best tree. You were perfect." Trevor hugged her, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, feeling gratitude too large for words. Absolutely perfect. They went for ice cream afterward, the three of them squeezed into a booth at Ruby's favorite place. She ordered chocolate with sprinkles and ate it with the focused intensity of childhood joy, getting it all over her face and not caring. Trevor watched her and felt something shift. The constant low-level anxiety that had characterized his life for 7 years was finally genuinely easing. Not gone completely, but manageable. The sense that disaster was always one mistake away had been replaced by the knowledge that he had buffers, resources, the ability to handle problems without everything collapsing. April brought warmer weather and the end of Ruby's school year approaching. Trevor received his first performance review at Crawford Technologies' formal paperwork that rated him as exceeding expectations in all categories. A 5% raise came with it, pushing his salary to 63,000 numbers. That still felt surreal when he saw them printed in official documents. He took Ruby shopping for summer clothes, letting her pick out things she actually wanted instead of settling for whatever fit the budget. The total came to $200, and Trevor paid it without flinching, watched her face light up at bags full of new clothes that were not hand-me-downs or thrift store compromises. That evening, unpacking the shopping bags in their apartment, Ruby looked at him with an expression too serious for 8 years old. "We're really okay now, aren't we, Dad?" "Yeah, baby, we're really okay." She nodded satisfied and returned to examining her new clothes. But Trevor understood what she was really asking, whether stability was real or temporary, whether she could relax her guard or needed to stay ready for the next crisis, whether doing the right thing had actually led somewhere better or just delayed inevitable disaster. The answer was still yes. They were okay. Not perfect, not without struggles, but okay in ways that mattered. Safe and fed and building towards something instead of just surviving. May arrived, and with it news that Brett Morrison and Scott Hendress had begun serving their sentences. 3 years in federal facilities time that would reshape their lives, if not proportionally, to the damage they had caused. Trevor felt no satisfaction in their punishment, just tired acceptance that justice was imperfect, but still mattered. Frank Morrison had disappeared from public life completely. The man who owned 40% of so many things had stepped back into obscurity, reputation permanently tarnished by his son's actions and his own failure to see what was happening until too late. Vanessa Crawford had been profiled in business magazines as a CEO who stood up to corruption, her company recovering, and her reputation enhanced by crisis survived. Trevor read the articles with detached interest, recognizing the narrative being constructed, but knowing the messier reality underneath. On a Friday evening in late May, Trevor sat on his apartment balcony with a beer and his phone scrolling through old photos from when Sarah was alive. Ruby, at 2 years old, held by her mother in a park they used to visit. Sarah's smile, unguarded and bright before cancer, taught them that time was not infinite. The three of them together, family complete, believing they had decades instead of months. 7 years had passed since Sarah died. 7 years of single parenting and financial struggle, and trying to be enough for a daughter who deserved two parents but only had him. 7 years of grinding forward through exhaustion and grief, and the constant fear that he was failing Ruby, that he could not provide what she needed. But Ruby was thriving now. 8 years old, confident, doing well in school, making friends, building a childhood that included stability and security instead of just constant crisis. Sarah would have been proud, would have seen how Trevor had held everything together through impossible circumstances and raised their daughter to be kind and strong and willing to believe her father when he said things would be okay. His phone rang, Harris checking in the way he did regularly even though Trevor no longer needed rescuing. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." "Good. Really good, actually." Trevor took a pull from his beer. "Ruby's great, works solid. We're saving money for the first time in my life. That's what happens when you stop living paycheck to paycheck. Builds on itself, Harris's voice held satisfaction. You earned this, you know. The stability, the ability to breathe. Still feels weird sometimes, like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. That'll fade, give it time. You're rewiring 7 years of survival mode. Can't expect 3 months to erase all that conditioning. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, the comfortable conversation of people who had survived crisis together and come out the other side. When they hung up, Trevor sat in the gathering darkness and let himself actually feel it. Gratitude. For Harris's friendship, in Vanessa's integrity, and the chain of events that had transformed a moment of crisis into something resembling redemption. For Ruby's resilience, in the way children could heal when given safety and consistency. For second chances in the imperfect justice system that sometimes, not always, but sometimes actually worked. The city lights flickered on one by one, the grid illuminating as evening turned to night. Trevor finished his beer and went inside where Ruby was reading on the couch, lost in whatever story had captured her imagination. He sat beside her, close but not crowding, just sharing space. She leaned against him without looking up from her book, the kind of casual affection that meant comfort and security. Love you, Dad. Love you bigger than the sky, baby. Bigger than forever. Their call and response, the ritual Sarah had started, and Trevor had maintained through every crisis and struggle. Words that meant family, meant commitment, meant that whatever else happened, they had each other. Ruby returned to her book, and Trevor closed his eyes, letting exhaustion and contentment blend into something like peace, not perfect peace. He still worried about money even with savings building, still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night calculating disaster scenarios that were no longer likely, still carried the weight of single parenthood and all the ways he might be failing Ruby without realizing it. But underneath the worry was foundation now. Stability built on income that arrived regularly, and benefits that protected against medical disaster, and savings that meant unexpected expenses would not cascade into homelessness. The ability to plan for summer camp and school supplies and maybe even a real vacation someday. 3 months had not erased 7 years of poverty, but 3 months had proven that change was possible, that doing the right thing sometimes actually mattered, that courage could be rewarded instead of just punished. Trevor opened his eyes and watched his daughter read, watched her exist in the safety and stability he had fought to provide. This was what it had all been for, not the ball or the salary or the redemption of his reputation, but this moment, this peaceful evening, where Ruby could read without worrying about where they would sleep or whether they would eat or why her father looked so stressed all the time. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, people making choices, opening doors, deciding whether to help or walk away, building the world through actions taken or avoided, through courage exercised or abandoned, through a million small decisions that accumulated into lives lived with integrity or comfortable compromise. Trevor had made his choice in a bathroom at midnight 3 months ago, had paid the price through 3 weeks of hell and come out the other side changed but not broken, had shown Ruby that doing right mattered even when it cost everything, had proven to himself that courage was not about avoiding consequences, but facing them and surviving anyway. The phone on the coffee table buzzed, another text from Harris. Forgot to mention, Ruby's scholarship came through officially. Full tuition starting next year. Congratulations. Trevor smiled and typed back. She earned it, we both did. Then he set down the phone and returned to the moment. Ruby reading city lights glowing the apartment warm and secure around them. Not perfect, but real. Not painless, but stable. Not the end of struggle, but proof that struggle could lead somewhere better if you survived it long enough. This was victory, not dramatic or cinematic, but genuine. The slow accumulation of okay days building into okay weeks, building into a life that functioned instead of just barely surviving. The ability to breathe without constantly calculating disaster. The knowledge that doing right had not destroyed them, but transformed them into something stronger. Ruby finished her chapter and closed her book. Bedtime soon, Dad. Yes, sweetheart, soon. She stood and stretched and headed toward her room. Turned back at the doorway with a smile. Today was a good day. Yeah, baby. Trevor smiled back. It really was.